are your priority, and it happens that knocks at your door happen and you have to run. But anyway, I'm really thrilled to have NPEA here to talk about data. It's a hole in the work that NNSP does, in that we don't have all the answers. And so we're going to spend a little time today talking about a project they have going on at NPEA and how maybe we can apply some of that to the work that we do in our schools. So with that, I will turn it over.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Blake, and thanks for the invitation today. And I've been talking about it for a while, so, and I know that your conference coming up and things are busy, so we definitely appreciate taking you taking the time to do this. So we actually have our last slide up right now because we too were having some videos to at least know what we look like. So I'm Elliot. I'm the executive director of NPEA. I'm in the middle in the blue dress. And then Zava is with us. So she's the member services senior associate, and she is in the blue shirt to my right or left, depending. But the tall woman in the blue shirt. So that's us. So now we'll go back to the beginning of the presentation. So we'll start from the top. And I know there's just a few of us on right now. So I know we've got Annie from Hillbrook and Dory, where are you from?
I am from Oregon Episcopal School.
Okay, great. Okay, just so that I know Blake was kind enough to send us a list ahead of time, but just so we have a who's on right now. Then there was one other person, Hannah.
Yes, I'm Hannah. I don't know if you can see me, but I'm here. Okay, good. Hello. I'm from the University of Chicago Lab School.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, excellent. Okay, cool. Perfect. And I know we may get a few other people along the way, but that's great. So Zava and I are excited. We're here to talk with you, as Blake said, about our data counts project, which we've been working on for a few years now. And then also spend a little bit of time just talking about sort of data and schools in general, and focusing on some data diversity kind of connections that we think are really important. So I'm going to kind of get us started and talk a little bit about NPEA, just in case people aren't so familiar with who we are, and we'll sort of go from here. And we're a small formal, so we'll take some pauses if it's great, good, but we will definitely set aside a chunk of for. Feel free to ask throughout. So, so the National Partnership for Educational Access, we are a membership association, and we have been around for about 10 years now. And we were started to kind of address some issues of access nationally. That was something that was important to our very beginning. And I'm not going to read these. We have our mission and vision up on the screen so that you can take a look at it. But basically, we're committed to working with schools and with programs across the country as they are working with underserved students. So we don't do any direct service ourselves. We are sort of behind the scenes in a way that Blake is, in terms of kind of providing professional development and information to members who are part of our network. And that, again, is mostly school and program members. And while we have members who tackle work from all different kinds of ways and serve different kinds of age groups and all over the country, the overall focus for everybody who is part of NPEA is to figure out how to support students as they strive for success in college and beyond. And just for quick context, some of you, and I know school folks tend to be familiar with a lot of the community-based organizations out there. So we are actually an initiative of organization called the Stepping Stone Foundation, which is here in Boston, although we are national. And so we are part of the work that they do. We're one of 3 programs, with the other 2 being direct service programs at the Stepping Stone Foundation. And one other thing that's just helpful to know, and the data of this, but we just wrapped up a strategic planning process. So we're in the midst of implementing a 5-year strategic plan, and a big the data that we're doing. So we're going to move on, and I'm just going to show you a slide that gives you a breakdown of how many we are in the group. So we have about 2,000 professionals who are all education professionals in 335 different organizations and schools, colleges, and universities. And right now we're in 36 different states. So we're definitely growing. We have 2,000 professionals because when a member NPEA, we don't put a cap on the number of folks who will be in our system. So it can be 5 people, it could be 10 people from a school, it could be more. It really all depends on what the member is interested in doing. And collectively, our organizational members, and those are the ones who are sort of community-based organizations, are serving more than 500,000 underserved students a year. And we get to know a lot about this data as we dive into some things. And really the majority of members are either organizational members or supporting institutions. And the two biggest work. One of our goals, which is really important to NPEA and which is why we're here today and talking with all of you, is that we are really continuing more schools involved with NPEA. It's very important to us that schools on data practices connect schools and CBOs in terms of supporting underrepresented students and around issues of data and diversity and data sharing and so on. So that's you know, sort of another piece of what we do and why we're happy to be here with you today. So Dave is going to talk a little bit about some of the schools that are in our network.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Karine. So as Karine noted, the way that NPEA works is that a school or nonprofit joins as the member, and then all employees are entitled to NPEA member benefits, which includes a lot of the professional development options and services that you'll hear about today. And so while we currently have over 335 members actively engaged, and that includes over 100 of those members that are what we call supporting institutions. So those are universities, K-12, public, private, and charter schools, and community colleges as well. So this slide is intended to show you kind of a range of the schools in our. This is a little bit of a snapshot. We do also have the full list of members on our website. And we're excited. We're getting new school members every day. We've loved in the last year having Green Hills School, Christina Sykes Academy, KIT Foundation has added more of their affiliates from across the country. So it's how we wind up in so many different states. And we really love working with individual schools, whether they're very small or very large, but also schools that might be an affiliate of a network. We want to try and serve schools. We know that's a trend that's happening in the educational access space.
Great, thanks, Ava. So as we're working on our strategic plan, things that we spend a lot of time on is our core values, and we've always had core values, but we wanted to spend some time really kind of honing in on a few things. For us, the core values are really key. Our members are, and throughout the entire time that they are members, they really demonstrate commitment to these core values, and we look at them as a way of how we define how we're approaching access and success, how we're serving students, how we're strengthening the path to and through college and beyond. So when members join, we share these out with them. If they want, we can have conversations with them about the core values. But what's really important in terms of how we approach everything, and this is very true with the data project as well as we get into that, but we definitely promote a culture of collaboration. So we want to share out information with our members. We want our members to come together. We want really collaboration and partnership to be a key thing of what we're doing, and that really helps bolster the core values. So you'll see them here. There's more to them. This is just sort of the highlight. But one thing that was really important to us, and it's always been sort of front and center for us, the issue of student success, but we actually kind of reframed it and put that first because we really feel strongly that student success is at the core of everything that we're doing. It's at the core of all of our partnerships, and it is very much at the core of the data project because everything we're doing around the data project is to the end of having good positive outcomes for students and successful careers and educational paths for students. So that's a big piece of what we're doing. And you'll see the bottom one is focusing on measurable outcomes. And again, that really very much connects to the data. So these are important guideposts for us in the work that we're doing.
Which is a great transition or segue into us talking about our NPEA data counts, or NDC. You'll see that sort of abbreviation noted throughout the project. The NPEA data counts project actually started about 4 to 5 years ago, and it was a response to our members requesting that NPEA guidance regarding best practices for measuring and comparing data, particularly in programs and schools that in the educational access space are often very similar, but they also have their own niche. And so when you're trying to figure out what's consistent for us to measure, we also want to tell our own story. And that's increasingly important in both programs also reporting out to funders and constituents. They really were looking for advice and guidance on how to do that best in this space. So that meant that for us, the goals of the project were to identify the most important areas to be measuring, and then to define consistent terms within those areas. For example, whether or not it's important to measure certain demographic data, and then how to consistently define terms if you're talking about race or defining low income or things along those lines. We also wanted to make recommendations about best practices in data collection and analysis, and to facilitate the collaborative use of the indicators as we determine them by developing an NPEA data tool of some kind. That was what we knew early on, even before we knew how we wanted to do it. And that goes to Kareen's point of collaboration and people wanting to be able to talk across different kinds of programs in schools. Slide gives you a bit of history of the project, including the fact that we worked with 2 different external data expert consultants, as well as a third professor in education school in UT Austin on the literature review side. So without diving deeply into all of this, because it is, as I said, 4 to 5 years in history, the highlights are that after doing sort of phase 1 and research and literature review, our survey out to members and some focus groups at our 2014 annual conference, our pilot project in phase 2 worked with 12 CBOs and schools of various sizes from across the country over the course of a year. And they met monthly to discuss the findings from phase 1 and to narrow down those indicators and define the terms together collaboratively. So what they began to do was to compare and contrast the data that they each already collected and then that of which they plan to collect. And they worked with the consultant to start to fill out early pilot versions of the data tool from all those conversations. And that meant it allowed us as our NPEA staff to do phase 3, which was we actually finalized and distributed what we now call the NPEA data collection tool in the fall of 2015 and again in the fall of 2016. And I'm going to share a lot more about that data collection tool in the following 2 slides. And then currently where we are is phase 4, where we actually, in phase 4, under the advisement of our longtime data consultant, Roblin Brigham Nahas Associates, we decided to switch the tool to an every other year model, which allows us to better track trends over time and also to avoid any survey exhaustion for our members. Trying to get ahead of that, even though we had so many do it in 2015 and 2016, we were like, you know, we want to make sure that we're doing this right over time and very intentionally. So instead, what we did this fall was we distributed a much shorter data survey, and it was soliciting feedback on the data counts project thus far and members' engagement with it. And also we wanted to know even more about how members are currently tracking and analyzing their data day to day, because that might inform how we revise the tool as well. So on this slide, you will see our 10 indicators that we developed through the NPEA Data Counts project, which NPEA has found to be the most important data that members can collect as those indicators apply to their school or program. So certainly if you're only working with college students, for example, you might not have their progress indicators in middle school or in high school, right? But for any that apply within these indicators to your program or to your school, NPEA strongly recommends that they collect data around these. The list is not intended to be exhaustive. Most of our members track data beyond this, particularly if they have their own niche in the space. Rather, the point of this list of indicators is to emphasize just how important it is that everyone in the educational access space measure these items where possible, because we know that they best support especially underrepresented student success. So the indicators themselves are split into 3 areas, as you can see: demographic, progress prior to high school, and then progress in high school and beyond. And there's also a total of 23 data points that the data collection tool asks members to report on within those 10 indicators. So I'll give a quick example because it can sound all pretty lofty before you put something normal to it. So for example, number 4, the indicator is staying on track in middle school. So one of the 23 data points within that, or 23 data points in the overall, I should say, but on the number 4 indicator, is that students complete algebra by the end of 8th grade, which NPEA knows from our literature review and our pilot project is a key indicator of students being on track to later graduate high school, enroll in college, and ultimately to graduate from college. So we know that the measure nationally is that every student should complete algebra by the end of 8th grade. And then what the tool gives us is a way for educational access programs and schools that work with low-income students specifically to report their own results about how many of their students are completing algebra by the end of 8th grade. So if a program has only 70% of their students completing algebra by the end of 8th grade, that might seem low compared to the national recommendation, but it's actually high compared to the average of all aggregate educational access programs, which in 2016 was 53.9%. So that tells us a little bit about how, okay, that program is probably going to want to make some programming decisions related to raising that number to be higher and closer to the national recommendation, but they could also report out to funders that currently they're about 20% higher than the actual aggregate of educational access programs working in the space. So on the next couple slides, we have some highlights from the findings and then from that data survey.
Great, thanks, David. So what's been really exciting is the fact that we were able to do 2 summary findings based on the data that we collected. And this consultant that Zip mentioned, Roblin, has been working with us. So she really knows NPEA, knows the material pretty intimately. And so she's been able to do the analysis, write both of these summary of findings. And so what you're seeing here on the screen is highlights from the 2016 summary of findings. So the most recent one that we did. And so and eligible schools and organizations are the ones who participated, and that just meant that they were current members, sort of up to date, and also that they, were serving. They were able to answer at least some of the indicator questions. So we had a total of 67 out of 106 programs and schools report it back to us, and it was actually a total of 7. A few of the members and schools had more than one program that they reported on. So we did have a pretty robust amount of data. And as you can see, over 200,000 students were kind of in the cohort. They were served by those 74 programs in 2016. Not surprisingly, things that we found, the majority of the students that were being served in this group were from lower income families and would be first generation college students, 81%. And then I think a very exciting one, that by graduation, over 96% of the high school seniors that were served by this group had completed the FAFSA, taken a college entry exam, and applied to at least one post-secondary school. And we know that those are 3 key data points that really help you understand whether or not students are going to persist through college. And so that was something that we were very, very happy to see. And that actually was equally as high the year before. So one of the things and one of the reasons why we didn't do another round of data collection this past fall, is because we didn't actually see huge trends between the 2015 and the 2016 data. In some ways that's very good because we saw that it was high, that 96% was similarly high the year before, but we are also interested in seeing any trends that might arise if we take sort of a year off of data collection, which again is what we're doing. I'm just going to go to the next slide here, and we'll just sharing a couple other things with you. So 99% of the high school seniors graduated on time, including a cohort graduation rate of 96.3% for students who were tracked 9th through 12th grade. So we're seeing a high graduation rate for these 6 years ago. 74% of or 7% currently enrolled in school. And so these are data points. And one thing that we always like to say about this information is, we have these 10 indicators that we think are really key and important. One who is trying to track college access and success for underserved students. What is important to say is that we didn't create these indicators. These are just the ones that we whittled down from huge lists of indicators when we sat with our pilot group. Sort of whittled down, and then the lit review really identified that these are the key ones. And so, what we haven't done yet, what we will do down the road, is actually start to compare some of our data to national data sets. But we do know that what we're seeing in that last bullet is actually significantly higher than some of the public school graduation rates across the country in terms of students then going on to 4-year or 6-year degrees. So we're excited to sort of do not only comparison and understand what's going on within our also externally to a national data set if we can do that. And of course, this is all reported in the aggregate. We're not actually identifying any by name in any of the work that we're doing. So, but just to give you a little of these exciting findings. And we do have a full summary of findings that we're happy to share with folks. If you're interested in, Blake, that's something that we could get over to you and you could email out to folks.
Yeah, that's
so,
great.
Yeah, we definitely would want people to see that if you're interested.
Yeah, and I think to that point that Karine was making about of what people are seeing as they've been participating in the tool, why I think that's such a positive reaction to it, is I think in particular around people talking about how much it's raised their awareness of data collection and improved the practices that they may have already had in that space, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And I think for me, that's things about the NPEA Data Counts project and the tool, and what we're seeing from this survey that we just slide up on the screen. Is I'm interested in way down the road the correlation that's very difficult to prove, that it seems like we're moving closer and closer towards, which is that the more where school tracks data and puts in measures to track data to support their underrepresented students, the better and better results they have. More aware earlier on any issues that arise. And what we don't want the data to do is to inform a program in any way that's limiting or not as people would want to be identified or seen. And so we're very careful, very collaboratively with our consultants and all of from schools to the programs themselves to make sure that this data continues to represent what trends we think are most important in the field. For example, looking at financial aid gaps of that nature, which we'll talk a little bit more in a second. So the data count survey it was designed again to with feedback about the project and how members are collecting data. We've had over 50 members complete it. We're currently in this moment updating results from it. So you're getting some preliminary findings, but these are not finalized yet, including that we know it's representing already programs in schools from over 28 cities in over 14 states. So we're really excited about the variety that it represents. We also have found some interesting things thus far, even just as we start to analyze it, which we know the majority of the respondents are the responsibilities of staff. So it's rarely in any of these places that there's one staff member who's assigned to data collection and analysis, and much more common that there's an overall system that many people share responsibilities among. Also, we know that our respondents are relying very heavily on free services, especially Excel, because there's no singular educational access database system that respondents choose to invest in, but rather broad systems are customizing. So a broad system like Excel, they're customized to fit what they're measuring and storing in their program. Similar for Google Drive, similar for things like Salesforce or FileMaker or ETO. These are broad data collection systems that they're then trying to tailor to fit to their program. And we're excited to see that there's a self-reporting positive impact from participating in NPEA data counts, including increased data collection, raised awareness of data and best practices, and then improved consistency of data tracking and overall stronger data practices. And this is certainly the trend to continue with the project.
Great. So we wanted to, so hopefully that gives you some information about the data project. So what we wanted to do now is shift gears a little bit and just sort of talk about schools and data collection. And again, for us, this is really focusing on underserved students you may have in your school. So we want people to kind of think about what does data collection look like at your schools currently? And then, do you have an emphasis on collecting data that would support students in your school? Those are kind of two things just to be generally thinking about. Talk through this next bit because it's important things to keep in mind. So as I mentioned earlier, NPEA is really committed to supporting schools around data efforts, and especially in terms of tracking data on underserved students. We really want to help schools in positive outcomes, and also want to help schools sort of best communicate with any community-based organizations that may be sending students that they serve in their programs to your schools. And we know that there are a lot of those community-based organizations out there. A lot of them are members, and one of the reasons that they do become members often is because they know that we have schools who are members and may want to really make those connections. It's just such an important connection to make. We've spent some time connecting with schools to learn from them, also presenting to schools and CBOs on this topic. And sort of, you know, we don't have time. It's a really kind of an important step I think will be helpful, you know, for I have seen teams they commit represented students. And so some of the things that we've heard from members over the years is that, you know, that are doing these ensure awareness of all students being served and respect of all students being served. Very big important focus on forging solid relationships. I mean, that's just key. Creating a culture of data, and I'm going to get to that a little bit more later. Promoting access, and then something that's really important is that schools are willing to ask key of themselves and others in order to achieve positive impacts. And so, you know, we know that this work isn't easy. I mean, I'm trying to work on this project for 4 years now, and we've really been, you know, working with our members to move things forward very slowly. So we know it's not easy, but we also know that people, and we also know that people, you know, you had people in the room responsible for the day, handle all of this. Other person, it's a smaller school, don't actually really data huge undertaking. Out, everybody gathering lots of different data points already. We know that you're tracking your students. We know that you're looking at your results, and we want to just encourage the schools that are out there to start to incorporate these key indicators in any way that you can. So, so those are a few things to think about. And these are some follow-up questions to sort of the ones that we put on that earlier slide. These are questions that we encourage schools to think about when you're starting to, you know, embark on diversity assessments at your schools. Start having conversations about the connection between data and diversity at the schools where you're working, and then how you're generally supporting underserved students and what the connection is to the support you're giving them and to data. It kind of all comes back to data, which is sort of funny for me to say because I've never actually really been a big data person. So it's been fun and challenging, this project, because it's sort of something that isn't always in my comfort zone, and I know that for a lot of people it's not in the comfort zone. So that's kind of an important thing to also acknowledge if that's the case for you. So I think, what successes have you faced when you how do you make any connections in your school between the data that you're gathering and your commitment to diversity at your school? What do your relationships with CBOs look like? If you are having students come to your school from a New Jersey Seeds or a Prep for Prep or a Stepping Stone Foundation or a Better Chance, you know, what kinds of relationships do you have with those CBOs, and can you pick up the phone and talk to somebody about a particular sort of human connection? Do you have systems and policies in place? And one of the things that Zeva just said that was interesting about this survey that we did is that we are finding there are policies in place for a lot of our members. They are more than one person who is responsible for the data, you know, in the school or program, and that's very because what you don't want to have happen is you're in one person, they know all, they're the one who does it, and God forbid that person leaves, scramble, or some to be taking is gone and now the time. That's something that you really be thoughtful about. They're kind of helpful things in terms of talking to other schools and partners, and some tips that they've shared over the years is one, to make that any or work has the backing of administrators, all school. It's not just one person understands how important it is to take the time to track this information. Along with a detailed evaluation plan that has a timeline, actually outlines who is responsible for which pieces of data things are going to get analyzed, how with sharing how we were doing the data collection, initially starting out every year and then deciding actually we need to take a year off in between. For us, we went through a similar process where we really out an evaluation plan for the work we're doing with members. And I just kind of bring the point home, is making sure that you have more person in charge of the data and really understands the needs of underserved students, understands how to connect with the CBOs where they're coming from. Again, if it's just one person and that person leaves, it can be a real challenge. So it's worth having a conversation up front with folks to make sure that you have multiple folks on call. And then I mentioned data culture. This is something that we talk about a lot because what can often happen is there's a few people who are really committed and kind of get it and understand, but if everybody isn't bought in or at least kind of aware of what's going on, it can be sort of a burden. Oh, now we need to gather this data from you and we need to gather this data from you. And if somebody doesn't have being asked to provide little bits, don't really understand why, then that's where you can run into some problems. And so you want to make sure that you talk about what is your, you know that schools talk about, what's your school culture, what's the student culture, what's the teacher culture, but culture. So a piece of that is making sure that, again, it comes back to the relationships and the trust. You're not just going to pick and start having, a conversation about a student if that's the first time you've ever spoken to the person. So you want to really build both trust in the school, but also, externally with schools and CBOs. And messaging are really important, and this has to do with your data mission and messaging and your diversity mission and messaging. What is it that you're trying to tell people both internally and externally, and those things should match. So if you have in from all levels, that's great for you of making sure that everybody across the board externally, your others who are alumni do understand that you all much doing it part of your. We also recognize, and we are certainly committed to this as well, that it's important to use anecdotes and tell a story. So there's a lot of numbers here in kinds of ways, qualitative stories that you can tell about the work that you're doing, because that's a key piece. And then I know I touched on this, but regardless of resources, there are things that you can do. So you could have a tiny staff in a smaller school, or a huge staff in a bigger school. But there are things that you can do. You can review your policies. You can know what you're collecting. You can involve staff in conversation and helping you to identify different things like your data goals. What are you collecting for everybody? Are you collecting certain things just for underserved students? How are you going to use this information? And of course, you want to use it in a confidential, in an appropriate way. But what are your goals around data? And then what are your goals around diversity? And, that conversation should really specifically be what between diversity goals at your school. And that piece, you can have diversity goals and data goals, and they could on the surface look like they've got nothing to do with each other. And you want to make sure that those are actually connected in a way that makes sense for your school, and every school is different. So it just needs to make sense for your school in the way that you're working with students. So those are some of the pieces of wisdom we've gleaned over the years as we've worked with schools. And hopefully, again, not an exhaustive list of everything, but hopefully those are some helpful tidbits for you as you think about data in your own schools. So we're going to shift, and Zeva's going to talk a little bit about how this actually could make sense for you in your school.
That's great. Thanks so much, Corinne. We're wrapping up or moving towards time for Q&A as well. So I hope everyone's been, if you have a question, write it down, etc. And we're really excited to hear from you and your fun questions on all of this as well. Different ways to get involved in the NPEA Data Counts project. There are many. And the idea is not, we always say this to all of our members, is not necessarily of all the ways we have to get involved or the different services we offer. I think sometimes it can sound a little exhausting to people if you felt like you have to do all of them.
Yeah.
So the goal is more that we try to offer sort of a suite of options or services and spread, and that there's many different ways people choose to get involved, and they might combine a few, but even if it's one or two, we're thrilled with anyone in the educational access space all the time. So a key one is to join NPEA. As you saw, several supporting institution members, and we including that if you were interested in joining, you can join as an individual, as a department of a school, or as the whole school itself. And if you're interested in learning how other schools have taken advantage of that, reach out to us and definitely let us know. We'll have all our contact information on that last slide as well. And always more than happy to connect you maybe with another similar school that's been involved before, and you could talk to their staff and learn more about what NPEA has looked like for them. Similarly, we know that many of you work with community-based organizations or nonprofits, and we'd love you to encourage your partners to get involved with NPEA as well. That can be joining, as you all can do, but there's other ways to get involved as a CBO, even if you're not ready to join either. And a big one of those is, you see in the fourth bullet, is our NPEA annual conference. It's our signature member benefit and events. You see lots of workshops on there around data collection and diversity work as well. And this year, it's actually our 10th annual conference, and the theme is Standing Together in a Changing Landscape, a Call to Action. We're going to be in New Orleans at the JW Marriott from April 11th to 13th. And we'll make sure that we get all that information over to Blake to be able to share out. And it's also on our website, including every single workshop and who's presenting them. And we're really excited at the number of supporting institutions, K-12 schools and colleges and universities that are involved in that event this year. Speaking of, a great way to get involved now, it's past the time where you could apply to present a workshop, although next fall that will open up again for next year's conference. There is still plenty of time if you're interested in marketing or advertising any of the great work your school is doing. Karina and I have joked sometimes that I think one of the best kept secrets in educational access is the work schools themselves are doing on these issues, particularly competitive and private schools. Our public schools as well, we know we're doing really, really important work in supporting students, and we want to give increased amounts of forums for those schools to be able to share that work out, both in their own reporting and nationally, but also to our CBOs. That's the best way to hear about the institutions that are going to support the students they're working with, is to form those relationships and partnerships, and that's what we're all about. You can read many bullets on this list too, so I'll try not to walk you through all of them, but there's the opportunity to complete the data tool itself in the fall of 2018. I'd love to connect with you around that. In a moment, I'll share with you an example of what a data dashboard report looks like, so you can get a sense of how it would look to actually see your data as compared to the aggregate. And then we also do share out best practice briefs. So as an NPEA member, you would receive for free throughout the year our online newsletter and digest, which comes about once a month. We try not to flood your inbox. And then in addition to that, we do send out sort of research briefs or white papers of some different articles we read on important areas, especially in our indicators. Again, an example you're seeing there is financial aid gap. So we ask the tool to report on how many of their students aid gap of $10,000 or under, or $10,000 or over. But then we also want to share some best practice briefs about how to best measure that, why that matters in terms of their retention in college and all of that. And then, as I noted before, we don't want any best kept secrets in data or supporting underrepresented students. We want to share them. So we also do member spotlights, and this year we're focusing on member data spotlights, where we can actually highlight an organization. It's a profile on the website and then also featured in as well. So it's a great way to sort of market those out. And you could go on our website now and even see past member spotlights and see sort of how in-depth those could go. So this next slide a snapshot from a sample data dashboard. This is not any particular program's data, so no worries there. We just created this one to give an example. So this is a indicator that's connected to indicator 10, which has to do with students not just enrolling in college, assisting through attaining their degree. So you can see that in our 2016 program year, among the responding programs, 33 of those 74 programs reported on working with seniors during the 2009 or 2010 school year. And of those 33 programs, 22 actually provided, I didn't say that they had missing data on that indicator, which was an aggregate of 893 students. How you can sort of read this chart is, okay, if you were the sample program, you would say, wow, for the aggregate, 51.2% of their programs in the green, of their students in the green there, so 51.2% of the 893 students served by that aggregate attained a 4-year degree in 4 years. But maybe for your program, sample program, only 20% are attaining it in 4 years, and another 20% are actually attaining it in 6 years. But that's only for 15 students that you've been able to track maybe 6 years into the future, right? So that's sort of how you're able to read or interact or engage with these data dashboards, is we try to give you your own information and then an aggregate chart right below it, so you can start to make some of those compare and contrast notes, and then follow up with us around best practices in each of those indicators. So you have been drinking from the fire hose of information on NPEA accounts. And so I just want to give you a few next steps about what the project is going, and then we have time for Q&A. So right now we're in the process of applying for additional funding, and we'll be gathering qualitative data through both focus groups and interviews on if and how members are using the data that they're getting back from us to make informed program practice changes. We're releasing the next data collection tool, as you heard, in the fall of 2018, and that will be followed by another summary of findings in the spring of 2019. We are looking at holding an NPEA Data Counts event in Boston in the fall of 2018 that will focus on best practices for making evidence-based program practice changes, which was going to include a panel of those who participated in the project thus far and sharing their experiences, as well as our consultant who will be on hand to share findings from those focus groups you're hearing about. So we'd love for any Boston area NNSP schools to be able to attend, and we'll make sure that we send all that event information over to Blake to share out as well. So with that, we have some time for questions, and I'm also going to put up our staff contact information in case anybody like that as well would get an email from any of you at any time.
Great. So I don't know if anybody has questions for us about any piece of the work. We're certainly happy to answer those. As you can see, as David said, it's a lot of information. It's a pretty hefty project, but it's ongoing, and it's really one of our initiatives now and over the course of the next few years as we work through our strategic plan. So hopefully that was helpful, Blake.
It was great. It was fantastic. I have a couple of questions, but Hannah, do you have any questions? I don't want to jump in before.
No, feel free to jump in, and I have an additional one, but you might cover some of it. So go ahead. Well,
first I was going to ask, when you guys collect the data from the independent schools that have these programs, are you only focusing on kids that are enrolled at their school? Are you also looking at like their summer programs that deal with kids that are coming from schools that aren't part of their, traditional school population, like a LEAP program or a Saturday program that Milton has in the summers? Are you also looking at that data, or is it only the data of serving the kids that are enrolled at the school for the traditional school year?
That's a great question. We do actually have a couple different ways that we're really excited that schools and programs are able to submit data on both. So the first is that the data allows you to select what you want your program year to be, whether it's starting in the fall, ending at the end of the summer, or actually starting in the summer and ending in the fall. So we give some flexibility so people have some consistency there. And then the best way that most schools have done that is they consider each of those programs as an independent operating program in their school. So let's have a trio bridge program, right? And that actually continues to support students during the year, but they also have a summer bridge program that's just for high school students to start giving them some, work and support ahead of all of that. Then they actually would complete the tool either 2 separate times, which we allow, so they could complete 2 tools, 1 for each program, or some opt to complete 1 tool, but they actually note the age levels of the students they serve within that separately. So they can be like, here's the findings, we're considering programs served by both programs as all of the students we're serving in this area, and here's how we're going to report on all of them. Or the grand majority of them usually choose to complete 2 separate tools. And some of that we're thrilled about is because they've said that the tool is actually very user-friendly. So while it might be a bit long, because it's 23 data points, we've worked really hard to try and make it in layman's terms as clear and consistent as possible. But once we've done the tool, we found almost over 75, I think, % of the programs who completed the tool in 2015 completed in 2016. And that was not just because we were asking them. Many of them did it even before we asked, because they were like, oh, I've done this before, great, I want to be able to do it again. And so all of those things helped us to be able to collect data from schools, like you said, both summer programs, but also within the academic year.
And just to add on quickly to what Zeva said, one of the things that we have that we send out to people when they're, sort of considering filling out the tool is we have consistent definitions for all of the indicators. So that's really helpful for people. And then we have tools and, a webinar and orientation to the tool so that people can actually, feel like they're very comfortable with it. And that's helpful for both schools and for programs.
And I know this has only been 4 or 5 years, but how are you tracking? I'm just making an assumption, and maybe I'm wrong, that you will also want to track kids once they graduate from college and what their success is after college. And so how are you gonna? What's the plan? What's the strategic plan for that?
Yeah, I think that's an area that both NPEA is looking into and exploring, because what we've seen is that's a space that the entire educational access field is moving into. And they're doing it, but they're doing it slowly, which means we have to stay at that pace as well. That, if the whole point of the tool is to be able to get aggregate measures for people to talk across consistently and collaboratively, then if you've got people sort of inching into that space, but they don't have common measures of what they're actually looking for, is it earning power of a degree, is satisfaction with their college experience, they felt like they thrive there and now they have got great connections and relationships. Like, we're trying to, really smartly and intentionally here, especially because at that age, right, students are adults and they have a lot to say about how they might want to be represented as well. And so we really want to think about, what is it that you're looking to get out of a college access program, whether it's at school or at a CBO. And then what do we want to measure and compare nationally? Because all of those things, right, that's why Corinne's time and we think those core values are so important. They matter as to how you value, the worth of a degree, the worth of, people's contributions in different ways. And so that's, I know, kind of a vague answer, but the short answer is the indicators are meant to be a living document. And so if those are the ways that, the educational access space continues and we find some common measures, then that's right, a set of indicators or data points we have down the road. But in the short term, what we know we can do is those best practice briefs, workshops, right, continue to feature great work from people that are doing that, and then see what we all can learn from it.
And one thing that we did when we revamped our mission, which I had up earlier on the screen for folks, that we actually hadn't had it specifically laid out before, but we talk about eliminating barriers to educational access and college and career success for underserved students. So now it's actually built into our mission. And so as we go forward with the data project, now it sort of sets us up nicely. And it's such a great question, Blake, because it is where everything is heading. It sets us up nicely to be able to continue to tackle the data project and then continue, with that important focus of college and career success, sort of whatever that looks like. And I can definitely envision us doing a sort of a similar thing to what we did when we first came up with these indicators, which is get a group together. We never decide anything in a vacuum. It's just never a good way to do it. So you get a group together to talk about, what are some of the indicators, and how many are there that people would want to start to look at for that, post-college time period. It's such a great question.
Absolutely.
I think, and Hannah, I know you have a question, but you said it earlier also about just writing down the indicators and how that sort of, it firms up the point of the programs in the first place. Do you know what I mean? Just by articulating this is what it is. And so just by putting in your strategic plan, it's like it's going to happen because it's written down and we've said it out loud. And so now we have to move forward. I find that anyway, that's how we operate also, where we're like, well, if we write it down, we're gonna do it.
Absolutely. I'm all about writing it down.
We're committed. Yep.
Definitely.
Okay, Hannah, you had a question. I don't mean to take all the time.
No, you're fine. I think I actually was wondering if you'd be able to go back to the indicator slide to see what some of those are. I'm wondering if, and maybe this is a little bit too early in the game for you guys, but if you've kind of gleaned any information from the process so far of what, maybe as you're comparing information brought to you or data collected from the different organizations and schools, if there's any kind of shared programming that you've found that's been really impactful, something that maybe is like an interesting connection. I'm really interested in like how a sense of maybe belonging or leadership in a program can impact student success and maybe how that's connected to graduation rates or college attendance for college. So I'm wondering if there are any kind of those connections that you've been able to find yet.
Absolutely, yes, would be the answer to that. I think what's been really cool for us is, and I'll speak for myself for a moment here, in that my background, so Corrine has been actually the founding executive director of and with it from the very beginning, and done an unbelievable job in sort of growing this membership association into what it is today. And my background was that I actually got connected with NPEA at the second annual conference, and I was working at the time at a college access program based out of Dartmouth College. It was working with low-income high school students from across the country at rural and urban high schools, and doing a program-based sort of house out of the college there, while also sending college students to school. Came to that second annual conference, I bought a couple workshops. My first away from it was I have to find a way to get back to the annual conference after that, and I didn't know that down the line that would include working at them, but I definitely knew for the 5 or 6 years where I was just attending conferences that the biggest reason was what you just noted there, which was conference workshops at the time were the best way for me, that it really brought to life. These are programs and schools that are actually doing this work. They're on the ground. This isn't a workshop about a research or a theory, et cetera. This is about a best practice in this area. And increasingly that became more and more a conversation about, well, how are they actually measuring that it's working? It seems great that we're all learning about how to empower people to find their own voice and their own identity, and to talk around critical race theory and these issues that I feel so passionate about. But what do you actually do that measures that has any results in terms of especially things funders care about, or that your constituents care about, your board, right? And so that is where I think the indicators actually come after us already having been seeing that for years, like at least 10 years of doing this. And so the indicators are an exciting way where we're saying, okay, these are some of the measures that can support those more qualitative findings. And then we do those, that's what the intention of those best practice briefs. If you look on our website around the actual workshops that we've selected for this year's conference, you're going to see all kinds of stories of exactly what you're talking about. What's the importance of having mentorship programs or not? How do, programs that look at leadership or the particular kinds of empowerment? One of them is looking at, can you bring in skills from improv and drama or theater groups to actually get more students feeling actively engaged and involved in their lives, and sort of how they're regulating themselves in terms of, time management and things like that. So, innovative practices in that area. We just also know that they increasingly absolutely have to be paired with data that support those findings about what works so well about them.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's really helpful.
I think that's where NNSP is, where we have we have all the anecdotal evidence, and we have all the schools that say the work that we're doing and the partnerships and the community engagement programs and everything are beneficial, right? I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. But when it comes down to proving to public schools who need the funding, or to grant writers, or to your board, or whatever, you have to have that data that supports the anecdotal evidence that's already present. And so this to me is like super inspiring to sort of lay out how might NNSP look at very specifically collaborative programs between schools. How will that affect all kids, not just underserved?
Right.
Right.
And that's exactly right. Yeah, and I think in particular, it's kind of, if you think about, like, we can say it's important that students complete the FAFSA, right, by high school graduation, or certainly on time. They're applying for financial aid. But that doesn't necessarily say anything to anyone about how to best advise someone who's low income, person in their family to go to college. So that's sort of okay, it absolutely has to get done, period. That's the quantitative thing. Quantitatively, to give briefs, or some of the things I think consultant Robin will find through these focus and things like, what are those trends and practices that can be the ways to actually do this, or start to implement this, especially when you grad.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of, I mean, we have the focus on underserved students. That's our area. But, you're right that these are important no matter what. And, some may be more important for underserved students than other students, but they're still, all incredibly valuable. You need to understand you need to understand progress in high school and beyond. You need to understand progress before high school. I mean, those are all things. It doesn't really matter who the student is. They're all really important, and there is that tracking piece. And then there's the question of, well, now what do you do with all of that information? And, that's sort of where we're looking to next, because we're excited that we're able to say now that, yes, we know members are starting to change their data practices as a result of being part of NPEA. They're changing the way they're gathering, and they're now tracking these indicators. Maybe they were using, some antiquated kind of a system, and now they've changed everything to Excel, which, there is better than what they had before. Things are changing, but now what we need to look at is, are these program practices changing? And that, that relates to underserved students, and that relates to all students.
Right.
I mean, how do you assess the data and understand it in such a way that you can make the right program practice change that's evidence-based, that's going to be good for all students? And I think that's, we haven't cracked that nut yet, that's our next phase, but I think that's such a good conversation to have and continue to have, because, that's what this is really all about. It's all fine and good for everybody, for us, for schools, for whoever, to collect all of this data. But if it's just sitting there and you're not actually analyzing it and using it to the end of making sure that you have the right practices in place for your student, then there's no point. Then you're just gathering data for the sake of gathering data, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's,
Nobody.
We say all the time, like, to me, I love that we're the National Partnership for Educational Access, because we know that, like, talking about underrepresented students does not necessarily mean low income, right? Like, underrepresented, they're underrepresented as compared to what it should be, especially in this country, given the incredible variety and spread of people that we have here. And so if you know that, then like, for example, we're really excited. One of our keynote speakers for the conference is Tony Jack, and he looks at running research and data comparisons. That it's amazing. He's one of the first people to do it when it comes to saying, okay, what does it mean if you're a low-income first-generation student who goes to a public high school and stays at that high school, versus if you are from that exact same background and you end up going or getting access to a private or competitive school? Does it matter to compare the data of how each of those students do in college, right? And similarly, does it matter if you're an underrepresented as a person of color, but from a background means, right, as a low-income background? Those two students share similar experiences in college. I think intersectional identities is already where we are, and it's just the reality. And so we want increasingly data we collect and the way that we report on this to mirror all of that.
Yeah.
Well, and there's also like this big push, at least we see, about in schools taking diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and examining them with correlation to community engagement and partnership programs. But your diversity, equity, and inclusion is totally different for African American kid who comes from very little means than an African American kid whose family is, you know, acquainted with independent school life, and
Right.
you know, those are interesting components to, you know, they're underrepresented, but they are two totally different sections.
Definitely.
Anyway, I find this really, I find this very interesting and also inspiring to really push this work for us. So thank you guys for sharing with us. I'm conscious of the time and that Hannah is actually in a school and has.
Sorry.
Oh my
No,
gosh,
I mean, feel free to
Thank you
continue
for
the conversation. I have to meet with a student now, but I will.
you have a job. We get it. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us, and I will see you in a couple weeks.
Yes.
And I hope you have a good week. Is it a short week? Did you have off yesterday?
Yeah, we